Perhaps you haven't considered it, but immigration affects your life every single day. Our food, jobs, taxes. Somewhere down the line, immigration policy has affected you. Because unless you're Native American, your family traveled to this country from somewhere else. So what's the value and what's the cost of immigration? This week, we're going to take a look at how legal and illegal immigration impacts our lives, our economy, and our world. It's our subject tonight, the immigration dilemma, and this is the business of life. Hello, I'm Michael Moynihan, and welcome to the business of life. Think about this for a second. What would your life look like if the millions of undocumented immigrants living in the United States were deported tomorrow? I'll tell you what would happen. Your kale salad, $48. That farm-to-table restaurant you love, empty kitchen. But wait, more jobs, and more jobs with higher wages, right? Well, the truth is, I really don't know if any of this is true, because depending on who you trust, immigrants are either a drag on the economy or a net positive. So what are the costs and benefits of immigration? As always, we're going to break down the issue using facts, figures, dollars, and cents. I'm joined by a panel of brilliant experts, uniquely qualified to answer this question: what is the solution to the immigration dilemma? Returning to the program is our old pal Adam Davidson, the co-founder and co-host of Planet Money on NPR and a columnist for the New York Times Magazine, where last year he asked, do illegal immigrants actually hurt the US economy? A question you'll be answering. Cristina Jiménez immigrated from Ecuador when she was 13 years old, and today she's the managing director of United We Dream, an organization that advocates for both documented and undocumented immigrant youth in the United States. And David Frum, the Canadian immigrant, is a senior editor at The Atlantic and probably the only former George W. Bush speechwriter to ever set foot in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Thank you all. And let's go to our first topic, moving to the United States, and our first number, 11.7 million. That's the estimated number of undocumented immigrants in the United States. It's 1/4 of the total immigrant population. David, this is a big number. What do we do? I mean, we can't deport 11.7 million people, can we?
Well, it's important that you're highlighting this number because it helps to sharpen the question. Because the question is not immigration, yes or no. There's immigration to every country on earth. The question is how much and what kind. The reason this debate is so uniquely rancorous in the United States, and for example, not rancorous in Canada, which takes more immigrants relative to its population than the United States. It does.
Really?
Canada takes more, but it's completely uncontroversial because the immigrants to Canada, like immigrants to the United States before 1970, tend to be better educated than those already here and more highly skilled. The United States, like Sweden, they take very large numbers of very low-skilled immigrants, and the result is downward pressure on wages, increased inequality, and huge demands on social services that are going to get bigger when some portion of those illegal immigrants are legalized.
You don't think that's true, do you?
I don't think that's true. I think undocumented immigrants to the U.S. help the U.S. economy. The rough statistic that economists use is they make all of us roughly 1% richer. So it's not a huge impact, but it is, the direction is certainly positive. When you see 11.7 million undocumented workers, one way to think about that is that's 11.7 million people competing for jobs with Americans. But that's also 11.7 million people getting haircuts, going to restaurants, shopping in stores. They provide both supply and demand of labor. So in other words, they're spending money creating jobs.
Let's look at this one. $3,000, that's the cost to smuggle one person across the US-Mexico border. The median disposable income for a Mexican citizen, $3,237. Doesn't it not, Cristina, get to a truth that people are willing to pay their almost entire yearly salaries to get a better economic climate?
I mean, you look at El Salvador, right, where the average household income there is $3,500 a year. So $3,000 is about 84% of the income of a family. The sacrifice is real. We sent a couple of immigrant youth to El Salvador, and what we saw there was terrible. You saw families that are literally fighting against the gangs because the gangs are controlling the neighborhoods. Mothers are having to choose between life or death for their kids who are trying to be recruited by the gangs. So for a mother or a dad, is really a decision about life or death for you and your family.
Let's check in with the audience and see what they think.
I just wanted to ask if the panelists could talk about maybe the root of this problem. We set up sweatshops and stuff like that in the countries nearby, and maybe that's why people can't feel the incentive to stay where they are.
We mainly focus a lot on domestic policy, but I think that when it comes to talking about sort of like the roots of migration, we can't forget that there's economic policy, labor policy, trade policy that has had implications into the situation that we have now. There's multiple things connected to the drug war, multiple things that connected to poverty, and also family ties, people who have already family here.
But we should be mindful that people do not migrate to the United States from the very poorest places in the world. It's too difficult. We don't have a lot of Bangladeshi illegal immigrants. We don't have a lot of illegal immigrants from Congo. That migration is actually, it's sort of a phenomenon of the global middle, not the global bottom. And for a couple of reasons. First, it costs money. And it costs, never mind the coyotes. Remember, a quarter of illegal immigrants come by air, overstay their visas. These tend to be people with who have actually some standing in the places they come from. It is just not true that the choice is destitution and misery or America.
Let's look at this next number. 414,397 is the number of undocumented immigrants that were apprehended at the southwest border in 2013. The probability of apprehension for a Mexican immigrant crossing the border is 20%. Last year, 2013, the highest number of deportations, a record.
Totally false.
Is that not true?
It's a completely manufactured number by the Obama administration. Is utterly false. There are two types of interception at the border. One is what is called a deportation, and the other is what is called a return. The Obama administration has taken all of the returns, that is, people were caught in the immediate vicinity of the border, and relabeled them as deportations. If you exclude 80% of the deporting that previous administrations did, then you get a bigger number.
Although I would say it's something to be celebrated. They haven't increased deportations.
Massively decreased.
I think from an economic standpoint, the thing that would benefit Americans tremendously, American citizens, American industry, as well as the people who want to come here, is some public policy, almost any would be better than what we have, where people can more fluidly come and go. I think if I've gotten to know many undocumented workers over the years, both as a reporter and as a guy who used to work in restaurants, and I don't know any of them who wouldn't rather be home at least part of the year with their family. And when you talk to documented immigrants, take any cab in New York City, those are people who typically spend weeks or months back home with their family where they have investments and other things.
This focus on the border completely misses the problem. The way you enforce immigration law is not at the border. The way you enforce immigration law is the Department of Labor goes to the meatpacking plant in the same way they would check wages and hours, and they examine the records of the workers there. And if they find that that plant is employing illegal people, they fine the plant owner. And if you do that enough times, the plant owner will say, you know what? I am not going to pretend to believe these papers that are presented to me. I'm going to get real papers.
You provided me with a great segue. Fake documents. $120 is the price for a set of fake identification documents, including a green card. The application fees for a real green card are $1,070, over $1,000. Let's get back to this issue of a line. When people say, get into this line and, wait it out, pay your $1,070 and become a legal immigrant like my grandparents who came from Italy. How does one actually get into this country if not, illegally?
The viable ways is skills, and even those have trouble. I mean, that's why you saw the tech company getting so highly involved in the immigration debate, because not even the tech industry is getting enough visas for the demand that we have in the market. So it's either through family petitions. So if I'm a U.S. citizen, I could petition my mother, I could petition a husband, I could petition children. But besides the family means, and besides perhaps the farm worker visas or other work type visas that mainly target high skilled labor, there's nothing else. And the reality is when there's a program that people can actually register for, like the program that the president enacted in 2012, young people have been paying $465 per application. So far, over $300 million have gone into the Department of Homeland Security on those applications.
Well, that, of course, will be deducted from the enormous amounts in earned income tax credit and a child credit that is going to be paid out. The people who are newly qualifying under the president's program are going to be a huge drain on the Treasury. They're instantly going to qualify for billions of dollars of direct cash wage supplements, and as their status gets further regularized, they will qualify for other benefits. Low-skilled workers don't earn high wages. The United States has not as generous a welfare system as other countries do, but it has something. And they will be all of the net contributors. Back in the 1990s, when the last time anybody looked at this seriously from the point of view of state taxes, and illegal immigration bears most heavily on the state rather than the federal taxpayer, it found that the existing immigration system in California costs the typical California family $1,200 in higher taxes for schools, for roads, for jails, for Medicaid.
David, I'm sorry to say this, but I think you are just wrong on the net cost to the average American. I'd say that a whole bundle of things happen when you take someone from undocumented status to documented status. It really is one of the rare things you see in economics of a win-win-win. What you see, first of all, is when you're very concerned about downward pressure on low-skill wages. And let's be clear, we're talking about high school dropouts. The economic statistics suggest that the one group of Americans who do seem to make less money because of undocumented workers are high school dropouts, roughly 3 to 7% less. That's the rough calculus. So not nothing, but it's a lot if you're not making much money to begin with. So those people are suffering. That's the one group that arguably is suffering because of undocumented workers. So if we take undocumented workers and bring them into documented status, yes, some of them will use more health care than they pay for. But overall, as a group, they're going to have higher wages, so they're going to pay more in taxes. The net impact is positive, not negative.
My name is Alex, and my question is, how big of an economic gain do employers get by hiring illegal immigrants?
Employers definitely get a really big gain, and that's for several reasons. So one is the direct thing that undocumented workers do command lower wages than if they went out into only the documented workforce and tried to get people to work there. Undocumented workers are much less likely to call the authorities if they're working in unsafe conditions, or to make a complaint about sexual harassment.
I mean, wage theft is a huge thing. My dad was working for a car wash in Queens, and he was unpaid for weeks, and many workers like him did. So, I mean, there's just so much flexibility for employers to find multiple ways in which they could profit from undocumented labor.
Let's go to another number here. $36,000. That's the median household income for undocumented immigrants in the United States. For native-born Americans, that number is $51,900. That's a big jump, right?
Yes, it is. And that's why we need reform, because ultimately, when you have undocumented workers, it puts downward pressure on all workplace standards, on wages. And so that's why we need Congress to actually do something about undocumented workers.
How much are employers actually saving by hiring undocumented employees?
So if you look in agriculture, it's massive. In fact, we don't know because undocumented immigrants are so fundamental to American agriculture that we really don't have any, there's no non-undocumented immigrant market to compare it to. What we do know is it would be such a sizable impact on certain industries, agriculture, meatpacking, that it's almost like destroying the whole industry, and we'd have to start anew.
No, I think that's really wrong. I think that is actually undynamic thinking. One of the things that many of you may have noticed, I don't know if this is true in New York, but in the rest of America where people have cars, when you go to a parking lot in most American places, and you come out, there is some very unfortunate person, obviously making very little money, typically looking very probably like an undocumented worker who stamps you in and out of the parking lot. If you were in a European city, that person would be a machine. They don't actually have parking lot attendants because the higher cost of labor forces substitution and innovation and higher productivity. Productivity in France is now higher than it is in the United States because of this driving towards substitution. We would have this in agriculture. I mean, the classic example of this, familiar to everybody, is the way raisins are harvested in the United States and the way they are harvested in Australia. In Australia, there's very little human labor that goes into the harvesting of raisins. In the United States, there's a great deal because of the availability of cheap, undocumented labor.
I'm Matt, and my question that I have is, what kind of impact has the drug war had on immigration in the U.S.? There's
one way that the drug problem and the immigration problem look very similar, which is that we, in both cases, the thing that sets it all in motion is American demand. And the way we enforce in ways that are almost guaranteed to be ineffective. We try to enforce borders. We try to enforce sources of supply. You're not going to make an impact on any kind of illegal activity until you deal with the demand. If and as Americans understand that drugs are dangerous and reduce their consumption, they'll reduce the stress. And one of the things I wish people who are considering drug use would keep in mind is every time anybody uses an illegal drug, that they are supporting and subsidizing terrible activities across the hemisphere. And it's a socially irresponsible act. And in the same way, American demand creates these immigration pressures through the hemisphere that effective enforcement of labor laws in this country would dampen.
You've made my argument for me. The idea of making sure every American knows that drugs are not great and hurt themselves and others, making sure every undocumented worker recognizes that they should have followed the proper U.S. laws. These aren't realistic public policy plans. You know, maybe it would be wonderful if that could happen, but they can't happen. So let's deal with the actual reality. And I think there's a growing consensus that the war on drugs, as it's currently operated, isn't working properly. And I'd say the same for the approach to immigration.
We're going to move on to our second topic now, immigrants in the workforce. And this first number, 3 out of 5, that's the number of Americans who say that immigrants place a burden on our economy. How do you disabuse people of this notion, because you think that this is wrong, right?
Yeah, and at the very least, what I would like to point out is, to the extent that David and I disagree, we're talking about tiny fractions of a percent. My claim is that immigrants as a group, documented and undocumented, make the country richer by 1%. The strongest claim that David has is that they make high school dropouts poorer by 7%. We're still talking about minor differences. The impact of computers and the internet, the impact of opening trade with China, have so much more impact on the US economy than immigration. The main way to point out that immigrants are a net positive is the simple point that they are not just a supply of labor. They're not just competition. They're also buying things. They're consuming things.
Well, let's look at the next number. Okay. That'll show us just that. This is the one that complicates things a bit. 1 out of 6 small business owners is an immigrant, and their businesses employ 4.7 million people. This is something that isn't thought about. I mean, we can talk about the sort of deep economics of this, but the idea in that first number that immigrants just come in, they're a drain on the economy, starting businesses too.
You have to get creative. You have no papers, you can't get jobs, but we're very creative, we're very entrepreneurial, and so, even family members of mine have started their own businesses, small businesses who serve the immigrant community in particular, and, they've been able to make a living. The government, it's saying, we don't want undocumented workers. At the same time, we do want your taxes. My parents have been paying taxes with an IRS number that the IRS knows that they have because they register with the IRS to do it for the last 17 years. And we have been contributing to Social Security, which, by the way, under the current law, they will get 0 out of that.
Let's look at this number here. $15 billion. That's the amount undocumented workers contribute each year to Social Security. They collect out of that 6.7% of what they put in. I looked at the source for this. It said the New York Times. I dug a little deeper, and it was by Adam Davidson.
It was.
It was incredible. So how are people taking money out of this if they're undocumented, they're paying taxes, indirectly paying taxes, but they're taking money out?
So a significant percentage of undocumented workers have a job in a meatpacking plant, in a restaurant, in an agricultural business, and their employer just sends a check every month or every other week, as they do for all of us with jobs, to Social Security. And the vast majority of those undocumented workers, like Christina's parents, will never receive a check back, unlike the rest of us who will receive substantial checks back when we retire. There's a small percentage who maybe came here on a worker's visa and then overstayed that visa, so that period of time when they were here in documented status, they'll collect off of that, but they won't for the rest of their money. But the point here is that $15 billion a year, an estimated $300 billion in total, which, again, isn't a massive number given the size of the U.S. economy, but that's the net benefit to the Social Security system.
Undocumented workers are paying into the tax coffers and not taking anything out, right?
No, wrong. No. That's true about federal taxes. It's not true about state taxes. Undocumented workers receive a lot of benefits from the state government. Tuition is a classic example. They use the roads, they use the hospitals. Unfortunately, many of them use the prisons. So from a state point of view, it's a big loss. From the federal point of view, there is a windfall. But if the suggestion is that legalization will strengthen the fiscal position of the United States. That's not true. Because what you'll discover is, again, this is an overwhelmingly low-skilled population. They are, and the federal taxes, the state tax system tends to be regressive, the federal tax system tends to be strongly progressive. They will receive much more, especially from the new healthcare system, than they are ever able possibly to contribute.
Let's look at the next number here. 50% of the country's crop workers are undocumented immigrants. Those people leave. And there are people, restrictionists, that want just deportations of these people. What is the financial cost to the rest of us?
I don't know exactly what the answer for agriculture is. I don't think anybody envisions mass deportations. What the people who are on the more restrictionist side say, what we would like to see is, first, we'd like to see the laws meaningfully enforced. It is not impossible to do it. Every other country on earth just about does it. It has been made impossible by people with agendas of their own. So enforcement is key. Take away the magnet, then see where you are.
Cristina, to that point, I mean, this is something that comes up quite frequently. I mean, if you say to the average American, they say, well, you know, these people are breaking the law. Follow the law. What do you say to that complaint, which is a pretty common one that I hear?
So what I say to that is that we can't enforce laws that are totally out of date and are not looking at the rest of the context. When you are taking the father of a family who has U.S. citizen children and deporting the father and leaving the U.S. citizen kids here, how is that a just law? What we currently have, it's not adequate policy. It needs to be reformed. And we cannot be implementing laws that are creating tremendous amount of inhumane experiences for people, like family separation, like deportations, and like family detention centers. Did you know that in the middle of New Mexico, we have a detention center profiting from having families, mothers, kids, and dads in detention?
To the point of who changes these laws. How do we get these laws changed? There are a group of people that are really, really pushing these laws to be changed, immigration laws, and they are people in Silicon Valley. Between 1995 and 2005, more than half of Silicon Valley startups had an immigrant as a key founder. There's a lot of this change in immigration policy is being pushed by Silicon Valley. They want more H-1B visas. You could explain to me what that is and why this is coming from Northern California.
There is a special carve-out, an H-1B visa, which allows companies to petition to bring over people with specialized skills that they're arguing they can't find people in the U.S. who have those skills. For all the economic trauma we've been through, we are still the beacon for the entire world. And it is nuts that we don't make it extremely easy for bright, ambitious, highly skilled, highly educated workers to come here. The fact that if you go to computer science programs, math programs, science programs at any major American university, you're going to see a majority of immigrants, and most of them will not be able to stay. It will be very difficult for them to get a visa.
Hi, my name's Julia. Thanks for the spirited discussion. I was curious if there were any benefits, economic or otherwise, of people immigrating from the U.S. to other countries and how that affects the immigration conversation.
I mean, the fact is, far, far, far more people want to come to America than want to leave America. It's actually a huge benefit to us. If you look at Europe, if you look at Japan and other developed nations, they're in a crisis. They have far too few young people, far too many old people, and they're going to have a major problem in the future, just paying pension benefits and those kinds of things, just getting the basic work of a country done.
All right, let's look at this next number here. 123.3 billion. That's the amount of remittances sent from the U.S. in 2012. For a little context, Saudi Arabia is the second highest source of remittances. They only send $27.6 billion. People come in, they earn money, but they send it back. Is this a good number, a bad number, neutral?
When you don't have laws that allow you to bring your family members or be reunited or travel back and forth, what do? You can have a choice of trying to figure out a way to bring your family back through, the border, paying coyotes and all of that, or sending money back to help them pay for school, pay for rent, pay for food. So all of that cash, we're losing because the way that the laws are structured, that doesn't allow family reunification either. Look at my family. We've been here 17 years. We want to be able to apply for something. My parents want to be able to buy a home here. They've been dreaming of that. They can't.
Do you have any insights or hard stats on what the next generations are doing, how they are contributing to the economy?
Upward mobility for immigrants has become much more difficult. The Ellis Island story is not the story of modern America. And that is not because the immigrants have changed, it's because the country has changed. That this is a country where there are many, many more opportunities if you have certain kinds of high people skills, if you can work in organizations, if you're good with words or numbers. It's a society where if what you have to offer is a strong work ethic, and a commitment and a strong body, the society is much less for you than it did relative to everybody else than it did in 1950 or 1915.
Just quickly, I would say that it's hard to think about the future of America without recognizing that we are at a sea change. We are at a moment, and we see this in the internal civil war going on in the Republican Party, where Hispanic immigrant voters are going to be a key determinant of national elections and eventually nearly every local election as well. So I think the way our political system is structured, the way our economy is structured, is going to be impacted by exactly who you're talking about, the next generation Hispanic immigrant.
All right, and I'd like to thank all of our panelists, David, Cristina, and Adam, for joining us today. And thank you all for watching. And we'll see you next time on The Business of Life.
Business of Life is made possible by Better Money Habits. It's a free resource that helps you build practical knowledge and take control of your finances. Powered by Bank of America. See more at bettermoneyhabits.com.